Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar. I'm really delighted to introduce the next speaker of the talk today, Dr. Kak-Chen. He's the Chief of the Pediatric Intervention Service at Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Florida. Dr. Chan actually comes from Malaysia. He did his medical training there and then came over initially to the United Kingdom back in 1983, where he started work in Edinburgh. He obviously wanted to do pediatric cardiology and he got some experience in Edinburgh. And then for a period of time, he went back to Malaysia and was practicing as a pediatric cardiology consultant, following which he came back to the United Kingdom. He had training in pediatric cardiology, and he then became a consultant in Glenfield Hospital in January 1991. And we were fortunate to have him up to April 1999. Following which he then went across the Atlantic to America and has been at Denver Hospital, and since 2007 has been the Chief of Intervention at Joe DiMaggio Hospital in Florida. Obviously, during this time, Dr. Chan has had multiple prestigious positions, including being on the educational board of the International Journal of Cardiology. He was also linked to the University of Leicester as an honorary lecturer, and has also been the director of pediatric cardiology fellowship training in America. He has been extensively involved in research, and he has over 50 publications and multiple presentations and abstracts, and has been invited to multiple prestigious conferences. And he has also written a chapter in a pediatric cardiology book. As we all know, his area of expertise is intervention. And he's going to speak to us today about from Groby Road to Glenfield, the early ASD trials. So without further delay, I would like to invite Dr. Chan to deliver his talk. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind invitation. It is an honor to be invited to participate in this afternoon session on cardiac catheterization. I think very importantly, I'm speaking to my teachers, my mentors, and my colleagues, and my good friends. And when I look at the participant list, I could recognize 4 names: Debbie Yip, Hitesh Taylor, my good friend from Malaysia, Masni Alvi, and my colleague who's an ex-Australian, Brody Knight. Welcome. First of all, it is going to be a technically challenging lecture to follow my former boss, who gave such an excellent talk. But I will try as much as I can to take you through the memories from Leicester that I have with the development of ASD closure using the unplugged septal occluder. I have no financial disclosure. I have no conflict of interest. All my talk is based on my association with the late Professor Amplatz and my good friends and colleagues who have supported the program and my journey from United Kingdom to United States. And I'm not going to discuss any non-approved devices. And for record, I'm vaccinated against COVID-19. And I'm not going to tell you a lot of things that most of you don't know already. I would relieve the success of transcatheter closure of ASD and perhaps share with you some historical tidbits of transcatheter closure of ASD with the unplugged septal occluder since its inception. This is the old Groby Road. If I'm not mistaken, my original office is on the 2nd floor right at the back. And that was in 1991. And 1993, I believe the hospital called Groby Road moved to Glenfield. And I said, I have to take a photograph of this facade showing that the hospital is for sale. And as you know, Glenfield Hospital existed for many years. But I cannot proceed with this talk without dedication to Heartling Children's Charity under the stewardship of the late Jill and Jeff Smart. Under their stewardship, they have been one of the most ardent supporters of the program. I'm indeed honored to benefit from the support when I started in 1991, where they donated a first color Doppler machine and a kickstart to a salary of a dedicated pediatric cardiac ultrasonographer. Like everything else related to anything, there is always the start. In ASD closure, the start is perhaps not as big as the Big Bang Theory, but nevertheless to us as pediatric interventionalists, it is equally important. Dr. Giovanni has alluded to the start of interventional cardiac catheter as introduced by Professor Rushkin in 1966. Some may argue that it was Dotter and Judkins with their vascular bougie technique. But again, for us, I believe Professor Rushkin is the start of pediatric interventional cardiac catheter. And it's very important because the ASD that he taught us to create is the irony of all. He taught us to create an ASD without surgery, and it is his idea that we should close the very same ASD he taught us to create, to close this ASD without surgery. And true enough, in 1985, his original idea was tested out in human beings. And although it wasn't very successful then, but the idea was solid. The failure rate obviously is the early design that involves, if you look very carefully, some fish hooks at the end, you have only one shot. It is like your mother-in-law packs your parachute. You deploy it, if it opens, fine. If it doesn't open, sorry, my friend, you're on your own. But however, actually, the first design ASD that became useful was in 1976 by Dr. Terry King. The person beside him is not Noel Mills, but yours sincerely. And although his device didn't came to fruition because of the size of the delivery sheath of 23 French, he did introduce two concepts, which is technique. One is the name, the umbrella device, and two, the concept of pullback balloon sizing. So how did ASD started with me? In 1993, my good friend, Jay Taylor, this is Jay, this is his brother, Hitesh, that most of you all know, and Professor Amplat. So Jay came to my house when I used to live in Kingsmead Road and say, hey, Dr. Chen, what do you think you can use for this piece of equipment that was designed by Dr. Amplat? It is new and it has never been used in a human before. So this is my original photograph. It's yellowed, it looks ugly. And my first thought was, what the heck are you showing me? You expect me to use a Brillo pad to put it in the heart to close an atrial septal defect? And my thoughts were obviously affected by, at that time, the currently used device for ASD closure, the clamshell, and its new reincarnate that is already in the works, the Starflex, and the Angel Wing. So I said, okay, you have to convince me. So off we go to Minneapolis with Jay Taylor. And there we met up with Kurt and Marianne, and then I was exposed to the theory of evolution. The evolution, not as great as what Charles Darwin described, but really a lesson in evolution of an ASD device. So these are the original slides. I have the multicolored, crazy colored slides from actually Kurt himself. What I did when I got this invite was to buy a slide scanner and look through all my collection and then scan the interesting slides to share with you guys. And Kurt Amplat is very sharp in his mind. And the first thing he told me is, Chen, you guys are crazy. And I hate to use the word, exactly what he used is horse whatever. And it equates to equine excrement. He said, you guys are trying to fit a square peg in a round hole or a round peg in a square hole. Fortunately, we do not have square holes. But nevertheless, with the currently available device, you can see that we do have to oversize the device quite a lot with sharp angles. Then he said, it's not just that you have a square peg in a round hole. He says the current device is not self-centering. He says all you have is to try to put a device right in the middle with a contact point holding two discs is a clamshell. And what he is saying is, if the device decides to slide in the defect, then you must choose a device that is at least twice the diameter to be confident of complete coverage. So I sit there, So I'm learning. Then he says, Chen, as an engineer, he said, why don't you guys have this concept of self-centering? These are engineering devices. He says, look at the Angel Wings device, which is the first self-centering device that is on the market. The concept is right. He was involved in part of the design, and the Angel Wings was also designed in the same university as what Kurt was. However, it is still a square device. So he says, if I can interest you in a device that is round, that is self-centering, that would work, and with a concept of stenting the atrial septal defect, would you be interested? Then that went on to lecture on methodology. And he says the framework of the device that he is promoting is made up of a material called nitinol, 50% titanium, 50% nickel, and the OL stands for Navy Ordnance Laboratory. So you can see that this metal is designed for warfare initially. Perhaps it's too expensive, and that's why we use it for medical use. And it is chosen because not only is biocompatible, it has a property of thermic memory and super elasticity. Thermal memory is when you cook the device in a set shape, it will always retain that shape, and it's super elastic. You can deform it, you can do whatever you want to do it, and it will always come back to its original shape. So one, he has the material, then the model. He says, I have a series of animal models where he and his technicians and vets have created a 13mm defect in dogs and pigs. And how he did it is not for the faint-hearted. They have designed a punch where on a beating heart, they will go through the left atrial appendage, create an atrial septal defect, and then keep the animals alive. And then the next thing he showed us was a pickled specimen of his device in an animal heart 3 months after implant. So with that knowledge, we flew back to the UK, we thought about it, and then 3 months later, we went back. And lo and behold, we had a prototype device with a delivery sheath, and we closed some ASDs in pig models. I think we did 3 pig models. We deployed, retrieved, deployed, and not only we learned how to close the ASD, we learned how to do transesophageal echo in pigs. We learned how to do CPRs in pigs. Now, mind you, pigs are very sensitive to ventricular fibrillation on exposure to anesthesia. Then he showed us some old animals who are more than 6 months post-implant. They were euthanized, and we look at the specimen. And it looks like it's pretty well seated and pretty well covered with, I wouldn't use the word neoendothelial, but certainly new tissues. Then after the animal models, we ran across the street from the university, sat in a traditional old Minnesota saloon bar grill and over a bowl of wild rice soup, we sat down and tried to think of what would grandma want for an ASD device. And this is not just my idea. I'm sure Kurt would have asked a few other experts around the United States, Europe, and we came up with this concept. One, the delivery system has to be small. Remember, in those days, the ASD closure device we had were delivered through 11 millimeter sheath. Second, the device itself should be self-centering. The technique should be simple. It involves least technical step, is easy to position, and involves short procedural time. It has to be safe, easily retrievable, and with the least complication, and of course, it has to be successful. And we unified all the assets. And then this is the device that he had. I'm not going to go through in great detail. All of you who are intervention would know what they are, but I just want to mention something that is very important, that the windings of the device belongs to two sizes, the smaller winding 0.04-inch and the larger winding 0.06-inch, and I believe the transition is 26 millimeters. Then, as a young man, this was my claim to fame. When I was a research registrar in Edinburgh, I was given a stack of charts to review to come up with a concept of trying to classify secundum ASD or fossa ovalis ASD for the purpose of transcatheter closure using the clamshell or the cardioseal device. So with the new concept of self-centering device, we have to readapt the conclusion of this study I did and to see whether it would still work well with the Amplatzer occluder. And the first thing we realize is device selection becomes of utmost importance because it now has a range of device depending on the diameters. And therefore, the concept of stretch diameter becomes very important. And Professor Amplatz then adapted the original Terry King's device of using the pull-through technique using a balloon and a sizing template, noticing how much volume we inflated and to select the stretch diameter and to select the device that will be matched or at the most 2 millimeters larger. And then the protocol is such. First, the pre-procedural selection by transthoracic echocardiograms, focusing on site, size, shape, and surrounding of the defect, again, all the assays. In those days, all the procedures were done under anesthesia. I believe some centers are using deep sedation, using the Michael Jackson medication. And we all use transesophageal echocardiogram as guidance. And now we have an intracardiac echo. The procedures are still, I believe, currently the same standard. And the post-procedure antiplatelet management does vary from center to center, but eventually focusing on aspirin. And what I did then was I went through my slides, and lo and behold, I have my original slide that I presented at Glenfield Hospital and at UK and at the First World Congress. And these slides, for those who are old enough would remember, were formatted in Harvard Graphics version 2.0, and that was commercially converted to PowerPoint. So I'm just going to present some old stuff, just like in a wedding, something old, something borrowed. And in 1996 to 97, we did 66 patients, and most of them are ASDs. Some of them are the early PFOs with strokes, and some are fenestrated Fontans, varying age from the young to the very old. And we have reasonably very good success. Obviously, basing on this number, one patient had 2 devices. And we were pretty successful. 61 out of the 66 implants were successful and with reasonable flow time. And if you look at your own data, I'm not surprised that the frequency of devices that we use hovers around the center from about 12 to about 20. There are failure to implants, and in our early experience, we realized the failure of implants are either the hole is too big for the device that we had. They are unstable after you deploy it. We chose a big device that we start to touch the mitral valve and we start to obstruct the other surrounding tissues. But we were pleasantly surprised that by 3 months, the success rate is very high. And so our initial conclusion at that time was it's safe, it's simple, it's effective. And for a simple cardiologist in Leicester, it worked in my hands. And it is very good success rate. However, we focus on 2 important aspects. You need to have a very good esophageal echocardiogram, and you must assess your stretch diameter accurately. And in those days, we liken transcatheter closure of ASD just like the dancing bear in the fair, where the organ grinder is the esophageal echocardiogram, and the dancing bear would be us, the interventional cardiologists. We just dance. The echocardiograph tells us we are in the right place or we are in the wrong place. But we do say that this is short-term, we need long-term outcome, and we need more documentation and more experience with the larger devices. And these are the people who made it successful in those days. Some of them are still with us working. Some of them have retired. Professor Amplat sadly passed away not too long ago. And this is the last slide I have to use the word of the late Professor Amplat. He says, equine excrement, closure of ASD is no longer a surgical procedure. And this is the first patient that we did in Leicester. It is his Kurt in his younger days. And this is the first in United Kingdom and the 3rd patient in the world. The first being Slovakia, the second, I think, in Gothenburg, and in United Kingdom, we were the 3rd. So what's new since the original study? Number 1 is the concept of pull-through sizing. But when we use pull-through sizing with a balloon, what we assess is only the minor diameter of the defect and not the major diameter. And we don't really make the defect circular. And this is the subjective feel of the resistance of the balloon as it comes through the defect is, as the word suggests, is subjective. Some have a more sensitive hand, some have a less sensitive hand. It's just like fishing. I can use the same bait as a professional I go out with. He catch more fish than me. I don't feel the fish when it nibbles on my bait. He does. So this is not a good technique. So nowadays, I believe all of us would use static sizing, using a compliant balloon, and hopefully not aiming for a stretch diameter, but using the stop flow diameter guided by echocardiogram. And the other thing we learned very quickly is, remember that when I came up with the original study on ASD anatomy, we had no echocardiogram or transesophageal echocardiogram to look at the ASD very carefully. The anatomist knows very well that us as interventionists forget that the so-called anterior part of the so-called ASD septum is actually not a true septum, but actually the part of the aorta, and they had labeled it the torus aorticus. And then we call it the ball aorta with the absence of subaortic rim. And we learned that very early. And I think Joe Giovanni alluded to the concept that if those patients with a subaortic rim, we choose to use an oversized device. We use a device that is 26 millimeter or slightly above, your risk of erosion then starts to increase. So that is what I've learned over the years with ASD closure during my journey in Leicester from Groby Road to Glenfield. And following that, I made a transatlantic journey to United States. But I would end the lecture by sharing with you something real that is extremely important. This is a photograph of Cafe Tortoni in Buenos Aires in our Pediatric World Congress. And while all are real people, there are 3 wax people. And these are the artists of the country plus a politician. And for me, this journey through cardiology cannot be ended without giving my thoughts to my bosses, Dr. Gottman and his team, the echocardiographer, EKG technician, and the secretary, and Neil, Wilson, and Meredith, who are instrumental in asking me to move across the seas back to United Kingdom in 1987. And these are my US connection, Chuck Mullins, who taught me a lot, not about just beer drinking, but about techniques. And my current colleague, Dr. Larry Lutson, and his wife, Debbie. And I like to end by sharing you this touching message from beyond. As you know, Kurt Amplatz passed away on November 6, 2019. In 2017, we got news that he is very sick. And he has severe pneumonia. He is on a tracheostomy. He is semi-conscious, and he has to be fed through a G-tube. So we rushed to see him in February of 2017. And in his break from his opiate haze, he was awake, he talked to us and communicated by writing, and he's still sharp despite all that. And we sort of said our goodbyes. And that was it. And that was in February. Then Hurricane Irma hit us in Florida. It was a bad hurricane. And lo and behold, on September 13th, I got an email with Hurricane and from Kurt Amplatz. I would have thought Kurt would have passed by then, but I felt honored by somebody who's sick, who still remembered me, and this is his email. And it's, I think, one of the most touching things that I've ever received. Thank you. Questions?
Allow me to ask you a question. First of all, thank you very much for this detailed talk. It was really fascinating knowing all the history, how this device was invented, constructed, used, and started to be an established device for most of the ASDs. Till recently, where other devices, they came in order more or less to copy this device. You mentioned 26 is the magic number, and as I had one experience, and I hope this is my last experience, I really couldn't understand why statistically it is shown from the company that the 26 has the most erosions, although it is used the same material, exactly the same size of the nitinol wire for the 28, the 30, or the higher, the bigger devices. Why it is this magic number 26? I have also heard people to say, throw out of the cath lab the 26, like it is the, yes, like it is the bad number. I don't know why it is the 26.
My sense is the transition from the softer winding to the harder winding occurs at 26. That's number one. And number two is the 26 is the smallest of all the harder windings. So if you look at the mechanics of the devices, the smaller you are, the tighter the winding, and they are stiffer. But I cannot explain to you why the 28 doesn't occur. There must be a minuscule difference in the expansile strength. But there you are. That's our only thought. It's the 26 seems to be the hardness of expansile strength to size ratio is different. Any other thoughts from any other interventionist?
Please, if any other of the panelists, Dr. Giovanni, Dr. Stamper, Sebastian, if you have any kind of idea why it is this 26.
I would also say if Prof. Anderson wants to say something.
And Prof. Yes, I didn't. Sorry, I apologize.
Yes, he joined us now.
Any reply?
Well,
Okay.
I just wanted to ask something, if that's all right. It was a fab talk. I loved it. Was Chen, whether, and you don't tell me online, but maybe separately. Do you remember the name of the first patient you did in Leicester? Because it would be awesome for us to be able to relocate them. So I'm sure they'll still be in Leicester because nobody ever leaves, and catch up with them. They're probably still under follow-up, but we may not know that they are. So it would be really great if you could let us know.
I would try to look through my files. I still have a whole stack of paperwork.
I thought you'd left it all in my office.
No. But I can tell you an anecdote. I think either the second or the third patient I did was a 19-year-old university student from University of Nottingham, and when I saw her again at 3 months, I said, you are now fine. You can go back to your normal activities, including bungee jumping and rugby playing. And she said, Dr. Chan, by the way, I'm the captain of the Nottingham rugby team. So at that time, we had no idea whether this ASD device is going to be stable when she has a bodily, collision with a fellow rugby player. There you are.
Dr. Chan, can I ask a practical question?
Thank you.
Yep.
So what do I do if my mother-in-law does pack my parachute?
Don't jump.
I will jump with 2 more chutes.
No, thank you very much.
To be fair, my mother-in-law is a lovely lady.